There's an old saying, you don't pull on Superman's cape. One governor just learned that you don't confront Donald Trump either. Who was it? Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Dr. Ken Henry, and this is Conservative Commentary, where we spread the MAGA message. Before we dive in, I'd like to ask you for a favor. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. This really helps us out and helps us grow the channel. And go to the address in the bottom right corner, which is youtube.com/@themagamessage, and check out our other videos. The recent confrontation between Donald Trump and Maine Governor Janet Mills at the White House underscores a critical debate over the integrity of women's sports and the rule of law. At the heart of the dispute is President Trump's executive order issued on February 5, 2025, which prohibits transgender women and girls from participating in female sports categories. This policy aims to preserve fair competition and to ensure that biological males do not undermine the achievements and opportunities of female athletes. During a meeting with state leaders, President Trump emphasized the necessity of compliance by each state with federal law, specifically highlighting Maine's policies that allow transgender athletes to compete in women's sports. He warned that noncompliance could result in the withdrawal of federal funding, stating, "You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't." Governor Mills retorted, "See you in court," signaling her intent to challenge the executive order legally. Trump's response was quite Trump as well. Now, Governor Mills' defiance raises significant concerns. First, it challenges the principle of federalism and the supremacy of federal law in areas where it constitutionally applies. The executive order is designed to uphold Title IX protections, ensuring that women's sports remain a fair playing field. By refusing to comply, Maine not only jeopardizes its federal funding, but also sets a precedent that could erode the uniform application of laws across states. Moreover, the inclusion of transgender athletes in women's sports has been a contentious issue, with arguments centered around fairness and competitive balance. Biological differences, particularly in puberty, can confer advantages in strength and endurance, disadvantaging female athletes. The executive order seeks to address these disparities, ensuring that women's sports remain a domain where female athletes can compete on an equal footing. Maine has now joined Minnesota and California as one of only 3 states that explicitly allow biological males to participate in women's and girls' sports. These states have chosen to prioritize, quote, inclusivity over competitive fairness, a move that has sparked heated debate across the country. While proponents argue that such acceptance and equality undermine the core principles of women's athletics by allowing athletes with inherent physiological advantages to compete against biological females. The implications of these policies are profound, affecting scholarships, competition results, and the overall integrity of women's sports at all levels. In response to Maine's policies, the Department of Education has opened an investigation into the state's compliance with Title IX regulations. The federal inquiry aims to determine whether Maine's allowance of transgender athletes in women's sports violates the protections afforded to female athletes under federal law. If Maine is found to be non-compliant, it could face consequences, including the potential loss of federal education funding. The investigation underscores the federal government's commitment to enforcing Title IX and ensuring that women's sports remain fair and competitive. Governor Mills' stance, while framed as a defense of state law and inclusivity, overlooks the broader implications for women's sports and the importance of a cohesive national policy. Her willingness to engage in a legal battle over this issue not only diverts resources, but also undermines efforts to maintain fairness in women's athletics. The clash between President Trump and Governor Mills highlights a fundamental disagreement over the preservation of fair competition in women's sports and the adherence to federal law. Upholding the executive order is essential to protect the integrity of women's athletics and ensure that legal standards are uniformly applied across all states. Hey, my money is on President Trump. How about you? Watch the following clip and please share your thoughts in the comments.
Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. A few weeks ago, President Trump issued an executive order making one thing quite clear. Any jurisdiction that allows men to participate in women's sports will not receive federal funding. That is my favorite picture of the first month, him and all those girls. The state of Maine seems to have a problem with that. But luckily for President Trump, the governor of Maine was at the White House today. And Trump got to discuss this with her directly. Take a look at the exchange.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
Well, I'm here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Trump is right about that last part. The people of Maine and the people of the United States do not want men competing in women's sports. Here now with reaction are Steamboat Institute Blankley Fellow, Kaylee McGee-White, and the host of the Gaines for Girls podcast on the Outkick Network, Riley Gaines. Riley, I know you were there when the president signed the executive order. You've been working on this for so long and calling it out for what it is. You experienced it yourself. How in the world could a sitting governor go against the public sentiment of her own state, federal law, pick a fight with the president in the people's house, and risk funds that are needed by her states because she refuses to follow the will of the people?
Yeah, it sounds insane when you say it out loud like that, but really we shouldn't be surprised. This is what the left has done time and time and time again over the past 4 years, and certainly in the month since President Trump took office. But President Trump's moral clarity, his decisive action, his swiftness, and responding very emphatically, if you do not comply, you will not receive federal funding. That is how it should be. The Constitution is very clear that federal laws, such as Title IX, they take precedence over state laws. So I believe the government of Maine is about to be reminded of that in a manner that they probably won't like. And I think it's important to mention, Maine received more than $5 billion in federal funds last year. There's no way that a small state, I think their population is like 1.4, maybe 1.5 million. There's no way a small state like that can survive without federal funding. So we'll see how quickly they get in line. And I think this could also be a really fantastic wake-up call for Rhino Senator Susan Collins as well.
So, Kaylee, also HHS Secretary, I believe a couple of weeks ago, he's issued vital new guidance to say that there are two genders, males and females. Now, there are a couple of CNN anchors who have very little chemistry and know even less about biology. They were very upset that this happened because they say that most scientists, quote unquote, have a more expansive definition of gender. What do you say to that?
Well, I think this is Trump's superpower, is he always gets his enemies to do exactly what he wants them to do. In the case of Maine, he wants a defiant state because he wants to make an example out of that state. And based on the Education Department's response just this afternoon, hours after that exchange between him and Governor Mills, he's going to get to do just that. The Education Department has already launched a civil rights investigation into the state of Maine. And B, another part of Trump's power here is he gets his opponents to embrace fringe radical positions that are guaranteed losers. And we say this a lot, Kellyanne, but I think it's worth repeating since the left seems incapable of pulling its head out of the sand to recognize this. This is an 80-20 issue. I think of even deep blue states like New Mexico, for example, completely Democratic controlled, has one of the most radical laws on gender ideology in the entire country. And at the Independent Women's Forum, we just released polling this week that shows that 84% of New Mexicans, including 79% of registered Democrats in the state, agree that men have no place in women's sports. This is a guaranteed political loser, and it's a guaranteed legal loser as well for Democrats.
Yes, these polls on men and women's sports are like as the sky blue and the grass green, yes or no. You're both on college campuses quite a bit. Riley, what's going to be the state of the NCAA now, college campus sports? How does this actually play out there?
Well, the NCAA released a new policy following President Trump's executive order. President Charlie Baker, NCAA President Charlie Baker, made it very clear that he was going to fall in line with this executive order. But of course, the policy that was released has glaring loopholes. It does not define sex. It does not define male and female. It resorts to things like birth certificate as how they classify sex. It still allows men onto women's teams, no matter how you read the policy. There's no oversight. There is no screening in this policy. So I believe we need to continue holding the NCAA's feet to the fire. We have the ability to do it now. President Trump's executive order was beautifully and thoroughly written. And I believe, just like in the case of Maine, if the NCAA will not comply with Title IX and with this executive order, I believe they deserve to lose federal funding as well.
Not just Maine, huh? The NCAA. So, Kaylee, President Trump did better among 18 to 29-year-old young men in the polls in November than any Republican president since 1988. Do you think this is the kind of issue that would get more young women to vote for him?
Absolutely, and I say this as a Gen Z young adult myself. This is a galvanizing issue for our generation because we've experienced the unfairness directly, and we're speaking out about it.
Excellent. Thank you.